Let's hope this all works out here. But actually, this is not a session about how to set up live streaming with Riverside and LinkedIn, which would be definitely a really good session to do. No, this is more a session about where we're talking about I call it identify loss, which is totally not true. So it's identity loss in B2B customer journeys. I will share my screen in a second. Purpose for today is, so we have 45 minutes. I will walk you through the foundations today. And so I will work a little bit on the whiteboard, walk you through the typical challenges that you have, about how you can solve them, how you can tackle them. And then we go even like potentially do a live demo, how you can debug things, at least like on a website. And with that, we will at least close the presentation part. As always, it's possible to ask questions, drop the questions into the comments, into the chat. Along the way, I will make some breaks. I will have a quick look into if we have some kind of questions to answer them. Yeah, exactly. Identify. You will see it when I share my screen. This is even, yeah. Sometimes I type too quick. So this is what I plan today, and I will explain in a second why this all is important. But let me share my screen first. So we need this one. Okay. So here we have identify. It's not a psychological problem we're talking today about, but maybe it can be. No, it's more like there's one specific issue, and especially like when you B2B, and especially like when you B2B software as a service, you have one problem. You start somewhere here. And then, so this is the nice XY that your marketing team has worked on for quite a long time to make it really successful. So this is live. They're spending a ton of money to bring users to your website. So let's put this as the next touch point. So this is like your website. And so they get them to the website. And what they would love to learn, what is really important for marketing, is they want to know, and this gap is on purpose, they want to know how many people they spend their well-earned budget on ended up in a subscription. And as you can see here, there is a huge gap from here to here. And this causes a problem because this information is usually broken. At least like in most of the projects that I'm basically get reaching out to me, say, hey, we really need to fix something. And when marketing is involved, I would say 80% we run into this kind of issue. They run specific kind of marketing activities. They have different kind of channels, and this is very simple. We just have one campaign. No, obviously we have 20 campaigns. We have 30 campaigns. And the problem is like the subscription created can happen, I don't know, 100 days later. It can happen 6 months later. It can be a huge timeline. And this is not the only problem. So yes, time is a problem because like cookie lifetime and everything else. But the other problem what we have is there's a lot of stuff happening along the way. So it's not like that we basically, so let's say the obvious one, we send people to the website. Yeah, it would be nice if it would be really like this, but it can be, let's say, let's take the obvious one. So we have website. So because we designed the website so well, people immediately say, I have to sign up for that. They sign up, so we create an account, and then they do stuff in between. Hopefully, at some point, they discover first value. So especially like when you software as a service, this can be even like a longer journey. So we make it here pretty easy for us. They discover only, but then maybe they talk to sales just because like they are super happy with everything what we have, but so they want to onboard the whole team, which makes everyone in our company extremely happy. Everyone is celebrating, but they have to talk to sales before, let's say, we create a final subscription or contract or whatever, which makes everyone happy. The big question is, do we still know when this subscription has been created that this initially campaign XY contributed? to this subscription, at least initially. Most of the time not. And so the reason for that is like that we have a customer journey that is not like a typical online store. So online store usually like online store, someone would come on the website, they check out a product, let's say the ideal. So someone comes with a buy intent on the website. So they check out a product, check out the price, add it to cart, go into checkout, buy something. Happens within, let's say, 60 minutes. All great. Super easy to attribute this campaign to this checkout or to this order submitted. Even when it happens 5 days later, it's still fine. So someone comes on the website first time, we save it. So we save a cookie value. We remember this ID. And so now we introduce the first important concept we will talk about in a second, identifiers. So we set a cookie here. So let's make the example also like a little bit more practical. So let's assume the marketing team is using GA4 or they're using Pivot Pro or whatever kind of, let's say, marketing analytics system to track the website. So they use this. So then, of course, we have identifiers. So in the end, like these tools, for example, depending how they're configured, but let's say this is 90% of the time a configuration, they add an ID in a cookie or local storage or whatever. So in GA4, it's called client ID. I think Pivot Pro just have a Pivot Pro ID. What does it help us? So they put the ID in here. It helps us when people are basically, how do we do that? We do it like, it's a little bit weird, but it's not that someone ends up on our website and immediately does something. So usually they do this one time, then they come back, then it takes 5 days and they come back again and so on. When we put something into a cookie and we don't talk about, let's say, 100 days and so on, so cookie lifetime usually depends on how you set it, depends on how your analytics tool is setting it, and then depends on how your browser is accepting. This would be a session by its own to basically dissect this, but let's say, okay, 30 days, quite safe in most of the scenarios. So let's say it's 30 days there. So within the 30 days, someone can come back and then basically also like lifetime gets renewed and we identify them again. We still know, okay, actually, this is campaign XY. So now comes the tricky thing. So they're on the website, but actually we want to get them here. So we want to get them sign up. The nasty thing about this is maybe to add a little bit more context. So this is happening here on www and like the good old internet days. And because we do the fancy app design, this now runs at app dot. Why does it run at app dot? Most of the time, because it's a totally different kind of application, and the easiest way to hang it under the top level domain without doing any kind of weird reverse proxy kind of stuff is like to use a subdomain like app.dot. So then basically, let's say our whole application is an whatever, Next.js, React, whatever kind of application. Website is like everyone does in the startup and a Webflow application. So these are basically two different kind of systems. And they usually have two different kind of setups. And often like they don't even have the same kind of tools because we are basically, so to create add a more complexity, this is basically the border between the marketing realm. So this is the marketing realm, this is the product realm. So we cross the border of different kind of teams. So it can also be like the growth team and so on. So maybe growth team even crushes down the border, maybe potentially. We don't know. So let's say in the classic setup, we have marketing here, we have product here. They talk to each other, but in the end, like they have different kind of priorities. What can happen here is they have a different kind of setup. Let's say they have a combination of segment and mix panel here, because they want to make sure that they track all the different kind of important user journey events that are happening now from here on. This is basically our first breaking point, because the problem is the campaign XY information is bound to what we have here, GA4 Pivot Pro. So GA4 and Pivot Pro knows perfectly that this kind of ID, what we have here, let's call it like, so the cookie ID, let's call it the client ID. So the client ID is basically connected to this campaign XY. So segment and mix panel set new IDs. Both of them, for example, set an anonymous ID at the point of time when someone lands on this account created part. This anon ID has nothing to do with this kind of client ID. They don't know anything about each other. Yeah, they are basically just living next to each other without having any kind of idea about each other. So they're just random identifiers. And so when we don't make sure that these things are connected to some way, we already lost the campaign XY information already on the first step. So we already failed on step one, and we still have some steps to go, which makes it tricky. So in the end, like what we really have to make sure that these know about each other. We come to this, let's say in 5-10 minutes, we basically. So I'm just wanting to paint the picture. I want to paint the painful picture for another 5 minutes to, let's say, to let it sink really deep. So this is part one. Let's say someone signs in. So the good thing is from the point where they sign in, we can introduce a user ID. And I can tell you, we love user IDs. User IDs are the best stuff in town. Really, like user IDs is the best thing. If you want to, let's say, optimize for one thing, you optimize for user IDs. Because in the end, the user ID is something that you own. Which is an essential thing. You own this. Which means you also have a reference about this, usually in your database. So someone creates an account. You add an entry in your account table in your application database, and this generates a user ID. This user ID then is used throughout your whole application. So throughout everything what they do here, not here, but potentially also here, is saved here. And so this is like the best kind of identifier that at some point we can establish. And so we come back to this, like what makes it so powerful, what we can do with this. The good thing is like when we use something like segment or mix panel, they take care of, as long everything happens in one browser session, they take care of that this anon ID becomes this user ID. Cross-device thing is another issue, so we will not go into this today because it's mostly like a session on its own, but let's assume so everything happens in one browser. So in the end, because again, everything is saved in the cookies, but these SDKs make sure that they track an anon ID. And at the point of time when we add a user ID and we identify this user, they make sure that in the end, like they merge this together. They also merge this together when then users come back, start something on mobile and log in. They have a different anon ID because like they start out on mobile. But then once the user ID is there, they basically take care that the second anon ID is also mapped to this user ID. So this makes this extremely helpful for stitching customer journeys. This is, for example, something that GA4 cannot do, or will not do out of the box. Or, no, honestly, I have to be sure. I tested this with the old one, and I haven't tested it with GA4. So we put a question mark behind this. Where once I sent the user ID, if it's also handling anon ID properly, would be something that I should definitely test out. But anyway, I definitely know this it works perfectly in segment and mix panel. So we move on. They discover the first value, same system. Still, like we're in the product realm, so everything is great. We use the same kind of system. Here, it's more the problem: are we capable of tracking this properly? Again, a topic for a different kind of session. Now we basically assume we have a really good product team. They really know how to instrument events, and so they can definitely cover this. Now we do something else. We leave the space. We leave the product realm. Oh my God, another break. So we leave the product realm, let's make this straight, and we enter the sales realm or customer success or whatever we want to call this, revenue team, whatever. We enter a new realm. And so the problem is like that at some point we have this journey that at least like for high qualified accounts, because like at some way here we identified, oh, actually they have 10 people already and they want to onboard 20 more. So they're definitely a good candidate to sell. So we basically connect them. So it's a great product team that connects to the sales team. So we do this here. And now we introduce a new system, which is called HubSpot potentially. It can also be Salesforce or whatever. So before we do this, I quickly have a check if we have any kind of questions here. No, chats. Okay. Okay. There are too many messages here in the chat. But I see that Philip is here, Jonathan is here, Matthew's here. So these are good people to discuss things, so I don't even have to pay a lot of attention, can read it later. We have HubSpot here. Great. HubSpot could also have happened already here, potentially. At least like these setups, this is an ideal, simplified setup. So for example, here we could have gone into, oh, we first do a demo before people create an account. Then potentially HubSpot would have appeared here as well. HubSpot might already have the tracking here. So let's say, but okay, here in this case, we introduce HubSpot a lot later. So HubSpot potentially. So first of all, HubSpot has, let's say, an own, I don't know, I think they call it contact ID. They have different kind of IDs. They also have opportunity ID, and I think they also have a HubSpot ID. So they have different kind of identifiers. One thing that we can all hope and cross our fingers that someone came up with the great idea to add the user ID to HubSpot. This is definitely not there out of the box. So this is definitely something that has to be set up. It can be set up in different kind of ways. So it can be that you basically make sure that someone from your development department creates a sync that runs at night and basically takes everyone who has created a new account, takes the email address as an identifier. So email becomes an important, potentially important identifier here, or more information, and basically maps it to the user ID. So just one thing to always keep in mind, if you have a job running that basically takes your backend data and syncs it up to HubSpot, always keep in mind you pay for context in HubSpot. So don't be surprised if you have 30,000 accounts here and you basically run the script overnight for the first time. HubSpot has potentially 30,000 new contexts. This can become pretty expensive. So always make sure you do this nice thing. In the end, we still want to achieve that because we need the user ID here to, in the end, map up everything. Then we have HubSpot. So let's assume we have this user ID here. So this gives us some safety that we can basically take care of our identity here. But now we introduce something else. Let's say this is the last realm we do. And this is, let's say this is like the payment subscription realm. So payment subscription has nothing to do with HubSpot. It's usually decoupled from that. Might be synced, but usually not. Let's assume we use Stripe for that. And then again, so Stripe has their own set of IDs and they have so many IDs. I don't go into this. So of course, like they have a customer ID, which so far has nothing to do with our customer ID. And of course, like they have a subscription ID and so on. So again, we have to make sure that in the end, we get our user ID into this. And so let me do like this because we will not load it from HubSpot, potentially not. So we mostly load it from our internal systems also like into this. So the big problem is like this campaign XY information. So we already could lost it here. When we have lost it here, everything else here will not work. So we might get it over here. And so we will talk about this, how we can achieve that. Then we really have to make sure that this user ID goes in there. But then we have two problems because how do we want to analyze the data? Just if we can make this definitely looks like the weakest link and we can solve this. This is definitely doable. But the problem is like this information about campaign XY is not automatically connected to the user ID. Right now, this information about campaign XY is in GA4 and Pivot Pro. It's not in here, it's not in here, it's not in HubSpot, it's not in Stripe. Even when we make sure that we basically, this is all given. So we make sure that we, in the end, we save the client ID also into segment and mix panel. So this is something that we can do. So this is step one. This is like the first thing that we have to do is we have to make sure that we take this client ID and once someone comes here on the account created page, so either we still run GA4 Pivot Pro also on this, then we can basically pick the client ID directly from the browser and can say segment and mix panel as well. Then at least like we have the information about this client ID here in segment and mix panel. So once this data is used, for example, in mix panel, we can later enrich the information about campaign XY based on this client ID. Still needs some work in the end to achieve that. Then we can make sure that we also save this information potentially in our backend about campaign XY. And then, for example, we can also provide it to HubSpot and Stripe. So the big problem is, let's say, how to solve identity has a lot to do is like where you basically analyze everything. Let's pick this color. So what is the leading, let's say, leading analytics platform? And we have two, let's say, generic, or let's say we have two approaches. So one would be like analytics tools, and the other one would be like the data warehouse. And so we have to talk about both because both have different kind of implications. If we were, so we go to the data warehouse in a second because it makes some things easier and some things more complicated. So analytics tools always means I have to make a decision which is my leading analytics tool where I want to analyze these kind of things. So it can be that I say, okay, it's GA4 Pivot Pro. If it's GA4 Pivot Pro, I have to make sure that this user ID here also gets basically back and gets connected to the client ID. So in the end, like we have no, this is like the wrong error. Oh, we're maximizing the amount of errors here already. So we have to make sure that this user ID also goes into Pivot Pro and into GA4 if we use it. This is of course like it's achievable when we on the sign up process, at least like at the point of time where the account is created, we send this information also like in these kind of tools with the user ID. With this, we can then later send different kind of events from HubSpot and also from Stripe when we have the user ID in place. We can then also try to get into GA4 and Pivot Pro. I don't say that this is extremely straightforward to do, especially if you start to work with GA4's measurement protocol that potentially you have to use to get the HubSpot data and the Stripe data into GA4. You will endure a decent amount of pain because the measurement protocol is definitely, for some reasons, I don't know. Google came up with the idea to make it as complex as possible. So you really have to figure out how you can do this, but it's definitely doable. So I created these kind of setups where we were pulling all the different kind of actions that were happening in HubSpot, in Stripe, with a script, and then send it off to GA4, making sure that we have the user ID and also like then is mapped to the client ID. It's definitely possible, but it's definitely not easy to do. So let's see if we have any kind of questions. Okay. So Philip has a feedback on how session is stitching in GA4. Only the latest gets stitched. Okay. Yeah, tricky thing. So this already makes at least like GA4 a little bit complex. We have Marcin here, but we don't have someone from the Pivot Pro solution team. So it would be interesting, like also like to figure out how Pivot Pro is handling session or anon stitching with a user ID in general. So what I can definitely tell is like segment and mix panel can handle these kind of cases. So it could be another solution that we, for example, say our leading analytics tool is mix panel. So segment is not an analytics tool, it's just a data pipeline. So let's say we use Mixpanel. Mixpanel now also has the possibility to do proper marketing analytics. This is because they support attribution models. They also support different kind of ad spend imports. So it can definitely be a tool that can handle everything. Then in Mixpanel, we already have an ID, user ID, which is great. So we just need to information about the campaign ID or about the campaign source. So naturally, we have the client ID here. We could also run a script here to basically cover everything. But we can also use a shortcut, which I usually implement, which is we can just make sure that once we go from here to here, maybe I really have to use different colors, basically pass on the, let's say, marketing reference. Okay, marketing reference. let me take this out because it's not relevant anymore. So marketing ref, what does it mean? So we do it like in the good old days. In the good old days, what did we do is like we had plenty of information in, for example, in URL parameters. So there are two ways how we can do marketing reference. So if someone gave consent, for example, we can save or we can write this campaign XY, the landing page, and maybe also some referrer information into a cookie. This is possible. The other way, what we can do is we can also have it in our URL parameters. This is what I meant in the good old days where persisting was even more complicated. We put everything into URL parameters and we just make sure that we basically were pulling it through all the different kind of requests. There are still websites out there. So there's a reason why on Amazon.com you have a lot of stuff in your URL parameters. This is one of the reasons. So we can put the information about campaign XY, also like the landing page, for example, in our URL parameters. So we can make sure that once someone goes from a website to the sign up an account created page, we have this information present. And with that, we can basically just write it directly into Mixpanel in this kind of way. By that, we don't really take care about the identifier. Just take care what kind of information we actually need from this step to be provided for the rest of the. And it's often more straightforward to do just this than to, let's say, make complex identifier alignment and so on. So this is definitely something that I recommend, and I implemented this quite often for, let's say, a lot of reasons. Another way that you can do is like when you can afford it, you could also move segment and mix panel just here and replace GA4 and Pivot Pro. The less different tools you have, the easier is identification management. One problem is definitely, and at least most of the cases where I see these two is like that these are products that have a massive amount of traffic on their website because marketing does a great job. So they get a lot of people, they get a lot of organic traffic, whatever kind of stuff. They run a lot of campaigns. And this can become pretty expensive for a segment pix panel combination. So it can be a cost sensitive way to do it here, to track still things here, because like you get some insights that might be important, but then make sure that you basically pass on the marketing reference when someone goes to account creator, because this is what we care about. And then we save this information to Mixpanel. And then again, we have to make sure that the HubSpot event goes into Mixpanel, the Stripe event goes into Mixpanel, which in the end, Mixpanel has more ways to achieve that. First of all, they have a decent, let's say, server-side SDKs when you want to write a script, and you can even load the data from the data warehouse if the Stripe data into Mixpanel now as well, so that you have different ways to enrich the setup. So this is possible. Another way, and this is like where in the end most of the people end up, is like we can have the data warehouse. What we can of course do is we can basically make sure that we pull all the different kind of data from all the different kind of sources. Let's say, so this is this, and then we put the stuff from HubSpot in here, and then we put the stuff from Stripe in here, so that we pull all this together in a data warehouse. This doesn't solve anything, at least not immediately. But what we can do is we can do something similar, what Mixpanel and Amplitude and all the other tools are doing in Segment as well, is we can have an identity mapping table. And identity mapping table in the end it means we create different kind of combinations of these different kind of identifiers, always coming back that we make sure that we can map it down to the user ID. And with this, we can make sure that also like we have all the historic kind of NNIDs in here as well. It's easy to write identity mapping table here. This is always like the tricky things when you do this kind of presentations is it's easy to tell it here. It's not so easy to implement it, but it's definitely doable. It takes some engineering effort to make sure that you also cover all the different kind of edge cases. It needs a lot of testing. I think this is the essential thing, which really eats time to really see, okay, are we mapping identities in the right way? But the nice thing is once you have done it, you can basically stitch all this different kind of data from all this different kind of sources together. And so what you can then do is however you model your stuff. So let's assume I would model it. So what I can then do is I can have, let's say I can have an activity schema, which is in the end like a bigger event log where I combine all the different kind of events that we get from here and here together. And then I can just do let's say I can just do an attribution model which again also sounds super simple to write it here, can become pretty complex depending a little bit on how you do this. But you can just start out with a simple one. So in the end, like you can just start out that you really want to make sure that the information about the campaign that we pull from here into the data warehouse is still can still be connected to subscription created, so that we can still say, look, the initial campaign was this and it contributed to this kind of subscription over time to this. Like the complex attribution models, you can basically you can spend your time on later. This is a whole field where it can keep you busy for a whole year. So you can go on account level, which makes everything extremely more complicated. Because like then we are not looking in one user journey, we are looking potentially 10 or 20 user journeys who all belong to one account. And then you have to figure out, okay, how do we do the campaign attribution? You can, of course, naturally run campaigns along this way. So for example, there could be the growth teams are running campaigns here, the customer success teams are running campaigns here, and someone else running campaigns here. So then you can figure out, okay, how do we incorporate this in an attribution model? So I can definitely tell you, if you're looking for something that keeps you busy for at least a year, developing attribution models is definitely something that you can go to. Of course, you always have to keep in mind, is it worth the effort? Does it really change the thing, how we view to it? I think in the end is like, also to know how campaign XY has attributed to subscription created is in the end 10% of the picture. We have the nice audience here with Philip and so on. Yeah, last click for the win. Philip is definitely a good promoter of let's say you really have to develop a full picture of, let's say, how marketing activities contribute to something like subscription created, because as you can see here, there's a lot of stuff going on in between. So in the end, the product can be totally wrong for this specific kind of user. It looked okay from the outside, could be a solution, but then of course not. So then of course you maybe have a segmentation problem, so that the marketing campaign is too broad, it brings in two other things, which still might be okay. You can still say, hey, it's fine, we get this 200 people, they're not so expensive. We lose 150 of them along the way because they don't really have a product fit with us, but we have filtered them out pretty early on, and so it's totally fine for us. So the whole thing is extremely complex, but still, you still need some kind of ideas to basically give marketing feedback about the campaign performance. So in the end, what you want to achieve is you want to see, okay, how does this campaign perform to naturally bringing people to the website? So then, for example, we have demo here, bringing people into a demo, then into account created, then into value discovery, then into talk to sales, into subscription created. So you will create different kind of, let's say, conversion rates about this different kind of points. And this gives you at least like a more complete picture to really analyze, okay, this campaign seems to be really good in driving people into demos. And we know from our experience, when people are into demos, first of all, they are, let's say, have higher value accounts, they convert a little bit better. So this is already a good signal back that this campaign definitely brings some value to us. But there's no, let's say, there's no easy programmatic answer that we can solve with this here. But still, we want to have the complete picture to exactly get this snapshot of, okay, campaign is really good in driving into demos. Campaign is really good in getting people in there that discover the value. It's important for us because this gives us something back about our targeting. If we have a campaign that performs really good and discover for people that they discover the value of our product, it seems to be that the targeting of this campaign works really good for our current, let's say, ICPs that work best for our product right now. So this is extremely important feedback for the marketing team. And so we have to ensure this. But as said, so to recap, and then I would say 5 minutes questions if there are some. You have to establish a user ID at some point. The earlier you establish a user ID, the better. Because, again, I think I have one thing that I always repeat when I talk about data setups. You want to get to a point where you control something. Because control means you can control quality, you can control a lot of things. The user ID is something that you can control and you can own. It's much easier to provide this user ID to HubSpot and Stripe than any kind of other ID that you basically collect on the way. To get everything down to the user IDs, definitely the best way to solve the identity loss problem. A good way to always keep in mind is you don't even have to stitch things. So sometimes it's totally fine to just get the relevant information. So, for example, like campaign information, landing page, maybe referrer. But if you have campaign information, even the referrer is not really important. But if you don't have them, you need the referrer. And then pass it on to the point of time where this goes into, let's say, your leading kind of system where you can connect it with the user ID. Once you have done this, you're usually already good to go. You can then start to do everything in analytics tool. I would most likely go for something Mixpanel, Amplitude, because they have more ways to enrich. So first of all, they have better ways to handle anon and user IDs. Segment also introduced a lot of stuff to, let's say, do this identity resolution. Rudderstack has the same things. These kind of tools definitely serve you better with this, and also like they make it easier to then, for example, get events from HubSpot and Stripe in this as well. At some point, you might make the jump into a data warehouse solution because, again, you own this. This is again, of course, you don't own the data warehouse. This usually belongs to the cloud provider, but you own a lot parts of the setup. You own the data pipelines, the transformations, the modeling, and so on. You can own your identity mapping tab. For example, you can add your own rules there if you don't really like the rules of the other ones. And you can basically define how you model the data. You can define the attribution model. As I said, if you feel motivated and you have the resource and it makes sense for your company because you can really see a value there, then it can really make sense to, to invest your time there as well. Yeah, this is how I would introduce solving identities across really complex funnels. We didn't do any kind of demo. It was just like, maybe we should do this in another one. Maybe I do another one because I prepared a really nice example where we were checking anonymous IDs, GA IDs, and so on. Maybe we do this in another one where I do a session about how to debug a client tracking setup. So I might do this in the future, but I think for today, my major focus was really like just sketching out how you can tackle all this. So I have a quick look if there are any kind of questions. Does anyone have posted any? So Philip has posted a lot of stuff, but I don't really see any kind of questions here. Okay. Jonathan, yeah, it's naturally PLG. Yes, it can be PLG, but honestly, we always run this hybrid model. So there's no pure, maybe there are pure PLG models, but you always have, let's say, mixed in that. Put it like this: the more hybrid, the more sales it is, the more platform I introduce somewhere. Yeah, again, like B2B SaaS type. Again, it depends a little bit on what kind of setup you run. In the end, it doesn't really it doesn't really matter so much which kind of, let's say, setup you run. The complexity is basically here. How many platforms are involved in the customer experience? The more platforms are involved in the customer experience. For example, it can also be here that someone is using a customer success tool in a classic PLG case. It can be different kind of challenges. In the end, the big challenge happens the more platforms I have that are basically interacting on the customer journey. So I think this is the important part. Okay, anything else? No, no other questions here. Not even sure if the Riverside part was working. At least no one wrote a message here. Maybe it was working, maybe it was not working. We figured out, we forgot the important part. I should have done this in the beginning. First of all, this is our first community event. We created this new community, which is called Event Guard, which is a nice name that the community came up with. Just pop this in here. So like a shot that brings you to the sign up. So if you'll join us, we do a lot of more talks like this. So we have another one coming up on Thursday. I cannot tell it's about product analytics. So let's say the narrow down topic will be published today, later in the evening. And then, so just also let me put this in here. This is the link. Join us. So far, we have 120 people, and we really have nice discussions going on there. It's all about event data. And in the end, this is an event data topic here. We will discuss these things as well. So if you have some questions. Another thing is I run this No Slides conference with the team that is building No Slides together with me. We run it in September, still a long time to go, but still, register now. You have your spot saved. It's not sure if we will limit the amount of spots yet, but yeah, everything can happen. So the earlier you register, so make sure that you sign up now. So it's free. It's a free conference. And it's really nice because No Slides actually means it's like we do stuff like this. So in the end, like we do live demos, we do live. The link is inactive, unbelievable. Okay, so we have to do this different then. I was testing it maybe then in the wrong setup. Let me do differently. So then we add this directly here. Here we go. So just use this one. This should work, please. I hope so. If not, post it. Again, feel free to register. So what we do here is basically it's a conference that we just have live demos, whiteboard sessions, and so on. So people actually really showcasing their thinking, showcasing a product live. And we don't do hello world examples. So this is really like proper examples what we do there. And so if you really like this kind of stuff, just come over and and join us here. Register now. And so I think this is everything that I wanted to say. I actually want to say before we get started, but I got confused by the identify loss. Again, thanks for everyone joining me. As said, so hopefully we will run these kind of events at least once a week, maybe every 2 weeks. We have to see. So I'm still getting speakers. If you want to speak about these kind of things in the community, also let me know. So we make this as an ongoing thing to really share, to share experiences and ideas. And with that, I would say have a great rest of Tuesday.